So I'm really excited to host a little interview here today about public exams. This is one of the newest initiatives that the Studio for Teaching and Learning Innovation has brought to William and Mary, and we've been talking to various professors and other faculty members about how we can use public exams in the classroom. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Heather Macdonald and Pablo Yañez today to talk a little bit about what public exams are and why they think they're important for faculty members and students alike to consider when they're designing and thinking about their classes. So I think the elephant in the room here for most of our listeners is, what is a public exam?
So to give a little bit of background, the reason I personally started to look at public exams was tied a little bit to COVID. So when COVID kicked off, especially in the STEM fields, which I largely work with, there was a lot of concern about how we do exams. So there was the question of sort of proctoring, how do we proctor exams? Mm-hmm. But there was also a lot of questions related to the stress levels that our students were having, especially during COVID. And I happened to attend a conference called the Remote Symposium that was held by Arizona State University. And it was a very large symposium that was attended by probably a few thousand people towards the end of 2020. And there I sat in on a talk that Ben Wiggins from University of Washington gave on public exams. So the idea behind public exams is, rather than inducing stressful single sort of examinations that students would largely study by rote, what you can do as an instructor is you give your students a fairly clear idea without sort of giving away the secret of what's going to be on the exam. You give your students the exam, and you can actually collaborate with your students to make sure that, for instance, that the material that you're going to test them on is stuff that they are familiar from the class, so that it aligns properly with what's in the class, but also that the questions are stated in a clear way. Students actually learn more deeply because they actually, instead of sort of stressing and being anxious about the exam, they're actually practicing what they need to be able to do with the exam. And as somebody who's looking at this from an instructor perspective, we brought Ben Wiggins, STLI did, about a year ago, and I thought that one of the concerns that a lot of faculty members, such as Heather, might have is, how do you do this without giving away the whole exam, right? Mm-hmm. And I've heard, Jacob, that you took these exams,
Yes.
one of these exams, and that it's, the fear that a lot of faculty members may have had is that they were easier. And I don't think that was your experience, from what I hear.
No. And that's a good thing, right?
Right, absolutely,
Yeah.
Absolutely, because you actually learn things deeper.
Well, it's so interesting to hear how you heard about that, Pablo. And I heard about public exams for the first time in an email or some other announcement offered by STLI. And I read the brief blurb and just thought, this is the best thing ever. And I wanted to know more about it. So I looked at the opportunities. There was a lecture and a workshop, and I could only go to the lecture. And I decided I wanted to learn more about it ahead of time. So I found his website. That's an article that describes it. And I just read his rationale for this, and as you described, Pablo, what it was, and just thought, this is so good. And like any other innovation, I picked the things that made sense to me and really focused on those. And I was thinking this morning about, why did I do this? Actually looking at his website as a reminder. And really the first thing was that, to me, it is something that really makes a better learning experience. Exams are stressful, and they're stressful for everybody, actually, for professors too, but probably more so for students. And I thought that this is doing what I think exams should do. It's a better learning experience, and I think it, the way I took his the public exam is basically you give students the exact questions that would be on the exam. And the way he describes it, you withhold either the examples or maybe you give them the data and withhold the question, but you give them very specifically what's going to be on the exam. Not everything, but a big fraction. So to me, I'd been doing things like study guides and give examples of questions in the past, and it over time developed into like a very long document, which actually would be considered overwhelming. So what I decided to do is give the students, as he suggested, the exam with most of the questions that were on it, and when there was a question that I didn't, I gave the question that would be and not the actual example they'd have to interpret. And I gave it to them, I think a week ahead of time. I don't actually remember that, but I think a week ahead of time. And what I chose to do is something I've been doing for a long time, is use in the last week of class to have students go over some of the, respond to the questions and do that in a study session. Anyway, so that was one of the reasons I really was attracted to the idea that this would be a better learning experience. Students would know very clearly what they're expected to do and could prepare for it that way. And a second thing that I really liked about the idea of public exams is that it gives students a chance to look at the questions and clarify things. I don't know how many times I've given a test where I thought I was being perfectly clear, and yet from the answers that I got on the test, I could see that it had been misinterpreted by at least some of the people, and that was never my intention. So I was really intrigued by the idea of giving students a chance to look at the questions and suggest revisions or just ask questions about that. What did you mean by this? So I thought that was really helpful.
Yeah. For me, this was such a small world moment. Like, I was at STLI and someone mentioned that there was this public exam lecture that happened recently. And then the same day I go to class with Heather and she's like, we're going to do this public exam. I was like, you guys know each other? So that was really fun. And I really had, for one, just a really good experience with that exam. I mean, I hadn't ever taken one of your previous exams, Heather, so I don't really know what that change really looked like. But one of the things that really struck me about that experience was that we had a review session for an exam the same way a lot of my professors have done it, where we all met in the classroom before the week of and just talked about what might be on the exam. Except we had the exam in our hands. Right. And it was so much better because then we actually knew what the goals were for this exam. We knew what types of things we were supposed to learn in a very specified way. And that was just it was much more productive of a conversation. And it really struck me that that was the first review session I had ever had, and honestly to this day still have ever had, where we had what felt like a class. It was just another class where Heather was explaining some concepts that we hadn't quite understood yet. We asked some deeper questions about sedimentology, and everyone walked out of the room feeling less stressed, totally cool. It was all good. And that was awesome, right? And it's like, why have I been to all of these review sessions in the past where the professor says these cryptic things like, I think you might want to know this.
Look at chapter 17
exactly,
really closely.
Please just review, this section of chapters. Please just read through them because I'm not even going to say all of the things that you're going to be on the test in class. You're going to just have to know it.
The fear that I would have had about this, and a lot of faculty members would have had about this, is that the exams become easy, right? They're just too easy. They're not really assessing how well students have learned this stuff. And what I've heard over and over, what I heard from Ben, is that what you can do through the public exam is that because you're being very clear about what they're going to be asked, you can actually make it a deeper dive in that exam, right? So that you can make it a more thoughtful process that you have to go through as a student. Did you find that in the exam, or?
Oh, I mean, yes. And I feel like it's a little bit of a non-issue. It's just not really how it works. So when we had this exam, they were deeper questions. They were written answer, a lot of them, please describe how this process works, et cetera, et cetera. These are things that, of course, you could study for any exam and sort of understand these concepts. But knowing exactly what we were supposed to study allowed us to give those richer answers. And Heather was able to hold us to a higher standard because of that. But when I sat down for this exam, I felt less stressed, but I felt as challenged as any other exam that I'd ever had. It was not any easier at all. It was just more well-defined, if that makes sense, which is exactly what I want out of an exam, right? At least personally as a student, I don't want my exams to be easy. I want my exams to be fair, like to be something that I was expecting and something that I was ready for.
Right.
And that's what I felt.
And if I could jump in, just coming back to the way you described your experience in that class, the review session, I mean, that just made me so happy to hear that that's actually how it worked out. And I would say just being in the class, I felt that the students were talking to each other, grappling with how could you answer the questions, and a lot of learning took place there. And that's actually what we're all about. And so to me, that was really nice validation that was a good approach. Well, Pablo, I'm so glad you went to that conference because that actually changed the way I thought of exams.
Oh.
And I have been waxing poetic about this to other people on campus and to colleagues outside the university. So thank you for doing that.